Hey, John, it's Carl.
Hey, Carl. You made it.
Yep, I'll be here for a few minutes.
Okay. Thanks for checking in.
Sure.
Hey everyone, good afternoon.
Hi.
Hello.
Oh,
Jaime.
You would be astounded at the corrections I've had to do. It's so bad. I know none of you on this call will ever spell my name wrong, so thank you for your conscientious efforts.
okay, so it's 1:02. Maybe I'll give one more minute. Just I see some more people are coming along. All right. Well, go ahead and get started. Hello, everybody. Hope you all are doing well, and hope you had a good weekend. This is the fourth meeting of the South Frederick Corridors Scoping Group. And just as kind of a reminder, this meeting is being live streamed through publicinput.com, which you can connect to through www.publicinput.com/S6814. And people can listen to the meeting, leave a voice message, or enter a queue to provide live comment. And you can also access this through the project website at www.frederickcountymd.gov/8141. And as per usual, prior to the end of the meeting, we'll stop to take public comment. And also as a reminder, although it looks like everybody knows this, please keep yourself muted unless you want to say something. And don't worry about kind of raising your hand. If you want to say something, just unmute and go ahead and jump right in. So at our last meeting, we had kind of an overview of the briefing book, and we dug into some of the kind of rich data and analysis that influenced the development of the Livable Frederick Master Plan, and which is influencing the South Frederick Corridors Plan. And we also talked about the vision statement and some potential goals for the plan. I am kind of continuing to work on drafting a more fleshed out kind of policy framework for the South Frederick Corridors based on that discussion. And I want to forward that to you all for your feedback, which I hope to have to you all well before our meeting on December 14th, which is kind of 4 weeks from now. But for our next meeting in 2 weeks on November 30th, we're going to kind of continue what we're starting today, which is a look at some of the some case studies of redevelopment that have been done in the past. Specifically, we'll be talking about next week. We'll be talking about the redevelopment of the Columbia Mall. We'll look a little bit at the Mosaic District in Fairfax County, and finally, we'll look at Meriden Green in Meriden, Connecticut. But today on our agenda, we have one item, which is a look at the parole redevelopment plan done in Anne Arundel County back in the 1990s. And they're actually kind of gearing up for a major update of this plan. And with us to talk about this is Patrick Hughes, who is a long-range planner with Anne Arundel County with a landscape architecture background and who works on areas, kind of small area planning, master plans, and design studies for the county. He's currently working on the update of the Anne Arundel General Development Plan called Anne Arundel 2040. And this has recently been released as a draft for public comment through the Planning Advisory Board for the county. And it's a really good document. And notably, it contains a chapter dedicated to healthy communities, which is really a big step forward kind of in the world of planning. So that's really good to see. And finally, he'll also be working on the update of the parole plan in the near future. So hopefully this kind of review of parole comes at an opportune time for all of us. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Patrick.
Thank you very much, John, and thank you all for having me. Can everybody hear me just fine? Okay. I have put together a very short little PowerPoint presentation that I will, if I can share my screen now, I will launch into it. So give me 1 second. Okay, can everybody see this? Parole Growth Management Area Master Plan. So very briefly, what I will discuss with you all, I'm going to give you a quick introduction and some background to the what we call the Parole Growth Management Area. And I'll talk to you a little bit about the existing planning framework that guides development in this area. And then I'll just talk very briefly about our master plan update and some of our thinking with regard to that. And then I'll open it up for any questions. Hopefully that will be enough to maybe jog some questions from you all that are relevant to what you all are working on. So to put the parole area in context, it is more or less in the very center of the county, and it's immediately adjacent to the city of Annapolis. And just an aside, why is it called parole? When I first moved here, I thought that was a pretty unfortunate name. It's actually a reference to a Union parole camp that was located here during the Civil War. So some historic ties to that. There's nothing related to that that historic, camp in the area that remains anymore. But this area is designated as one of 3 town centers in the county. It's been so designated since the 1970s. And what that means is that it's targeted for economic growth and public investment more so than other parts of the county in order to relieve some of the growth pressures on other parts of the county. Our parole area is about 1,500 acres in size. And some of the challenges are that it is bisected by some of these major highways that you see here. And the area currently, it's largely built out in contrast to some of our other town centers. So the parole area is a key regional destination and economic driver in Anne Arundel County. Some of our largest employers in the county are located here, actually. The county government, our regional hospital, Anne Arundel Medical Center, and then a couple of large shopping areas that collectively employ a lot of people. The Annapolis Town Center and the Annapolis Mall are all located in the Parole Town Center. So it's, like I said, it is largely built out. And so in terms of development here, we're looking more at redevelopment than we are greenfield development going forward. There's a really strong auto orientation throughout the area, and the existing roads in the area have a lot of congestion. So thinking about this going forward, how do we retrofit this area to better handle both automobile traffic, but then other modes as well, particularly bike ped travel and other improvements. We have a lot of aging shopping centers, which is what you see in these photos. A lot of underutilized properties that we hope would be ripe for redevelopment. So that's it in a nutshell. The land use in this area is primarily commercial, retail, and office. That's the majority of the land use here. There is some residential, but not a whole lot. There are about 1,100 units, residential units currently, and generally these have a smaller household size than either the remainder of the county or the city of Annapolis. It is a place that's in high demand for commercial and office locations. Currently, pre-COVID, the data was showing that vacancy rates were extremely low compared to the rest of the county, and developers were saying that there is high demand for locating in Parole, and I think that's still the case. This is an area that has a lot of growth pressure. So development in the Parole area is guided really by two things. On the left, you see our Parole Urban Design Concept Plan. This is from 1994, and this master plan established an overall vision for Parole as a walkable urban area with high quality development. And then we have a separate set of development requirements that are in the code. These are applied as an overlay zone over the underlying zoning. So that overlay zone places additional development allowances and regulations on top of the underlying zoning classes in Parole. So some of the key features of the 1994 plan, the original vision was, like I said, really to help the area develop into a dense, compact activity node with mixed uses, interconnected streets and public spaces, a pedestrian-friendly environment. And there was a real desire at the time, stated in the master plan, to increase residential uses in Parole and help transform it from more than just a regional commercial and service hub. The plan really hoped to encourage mixed-use development, and it also established an incentive program that would help permit development flexibility in exchange for enhanced design features when developers were implementing some development on certain sites. The overall framework that governs development, it's set up as there's a framework of 3 overall policy areas that establish 3 tiers of development intensity, and that intensity is defined really by building height and FAR requirements, floor area ratio requirements. And then in addition to that, there are 11 sub areas for Parole that have more refined provisions. And then, as I mentioned, additionally, there's the incentive program that can allow for additional density or reduced open space requirements in exchange for enhanced development proffers. And my take on this is that together, these kind of layers of regulation, they kind of ended up being a little unnecessarily complicated. There are some instances of conflict between what's discussed for the different sub areas versus what's in the code for some of the policy areas. And that starts to become problematic as we're trying to implement or administer the code and these provisions for developments when they come in for review and approval. Some of the strengths and issues with the 1994 plan as it is, the vision remains pretty applicable, and it's been reinforced in our current update to the comprehensive plan. This desire for a dense urban mixed-use environment with walkability, and the idea of growth being targeted to the Parole area in order to relieve some of the growth pressures on the surrounding parts of the county. Another thing that actually does work is that the plan and the regulations, they do provide flexibility for developers, and developers tend to appreciate that. But one issue with that is that this complex kind of layering of different frameworks, developers can't really independently interpret what it is that they can do with their property. And so when they come in and say, we have this property that we want to redevelop, what can we do with it? Our staff really isn't able to have too many hypothetical conversations with them. We have to ask them to put forward an actual development plan or idea, and then our staff has to spend a lot of time reviewing against the different components of the regulations. And the regulations have a whole lot of, if you're doing this, then this applies, and if you do that, then there's this other thing. So a whole lot of if this, then that scenarios that make it pretty complex. Currently, there is a real lack of a strong bike ped network. This was something that was identified in the 94 plan, and it just hasn't come to fruition adequately. So that's something that we're going to be trying to work through going forward, and that's complicated when you're working in a built-out environment. And some different elements within the plan. There are some out-of-date recommendations, of course. It's from 25 years ago, and particularly our functional plans, the transportation connections, that feature ideas that were long ago either developed or studied and abandoned. So we've got to update this for better guidance for our decision makers. And some of the specific regulations within the plan or within the code are actually problematic. For instance, the master plan intends to encourage mixed use, but in the code, mixed use is only allowed if you come in through the incentive program. And so it's not a by right thing, which is a little bit of a disincentive to that idea of mixed use. And then certain recommendations, such as parallel road connections that are shown in our master plan, are not so easy to administer in the development process. And I'm going to show you an example here. The example you see on your left, there was an idea to punch through a road to connect to a site. I think you can see me indicating it here. The existing lot lines and such are what you see on the right. And so we had a development come in for this front parcel here, and there was a lot of discussion about where in the world is this connection supposed to be. And our development division had a really hard time trying to justify, is that on your property? Is it on the property behind or adjacent? And the end result was a weak future site connection that's indicated in the development plans that have come through the development process, and not really a true street. It's more of a site interconnection. And that, there's always a tension between developing sort of a vision for and indicating a vision for new connections, but then actually getting that implemented on the ground. It's something that we're going to be looking at as we get into a master plan update and how to delineate improvements like this. I will say too, there was an attempt to update this master plan in 2003, but a full master plan was put together. A full master plan was drafted and went to the council, and ultimately it was voted down by the council. And that was before my time here, but I think in talking to people, what happened was that there was a lot of political wrangling over the future development or redevelopment of a large shopping center site that's in the core of the town center. It was an area that was clearly going to be redeveloped. It had one landowner, and ultimately, just the political wrangling, that master plan draft was voted down. But the area did subsequently redevelop with a lifestyle center that features the county's tallest buildings, and it's really a centerpiece and anchor of the Parole area. Overall, that development is well regarded, and the fact that it was developed under the 94 provisions, I think speaks to something working well with the 94 plan as it stands now. The developer did proffer some additional design standards that are still used to govern any further development in that area. So just very briefly, I won't get too deep into this, but in the process of updating our master plan right now, this is something that we had started in 2017, and we had to pause it when we were directed to start an update of our county's comprehensive plan. We have largely finished that comprehensive plan effort. It's going through the political process at this point, getting ready to go to our planning advisory board. So, but our comp plan again reaffirms Parole as a targeted town center, and we are now going to pick up again with updating this master plan. And so with this update, we want to take a look at where is Parole now, and where does the community want to be in the future. So looking at its vision, we want to clarify and simplify that existing regulatory framework that will achieve the vision, and we're hoping to facilitate the plan's use by property owners and developers and staff. Hopefully make it a little bit less onerous to figure out what can be done on any particular site. A key piece of this update is going to need to be a strong bike ped network and amenity requirements. And beyond that, we want to just maintain what works about the current regulations, but figure out how to ensure that we're getting higher quality development without stifling the development in this area where we ultimately want to encourage it. I don't know if this is so relevant to you all. Forgive me, I've pulled this from a different presentation that I had given, but we had some outreach back in 2017, and I will point out these. After we had started our master plan update, our Office of Transportation indicated that there were a couple of studies that they really wanted to jump on for the Parole area. One was the first was a intermodal facility study where they were looking at 3 sites in the Parole area to locate really a transit facility that would sort of knit together all of the different transit routes, the commuter bus lines and the local bus lines, and where that might be located in the Parole area. So that's a study that has been completed and will factor into our master plan. And then another study is a general mobility study for all modes for the Parole area, where they've worked with a consultant to pull together some baseline data and identify existing and future mobility needs based on an ultimate build out of the Parole area, and then develop some design standards that are targeted and specific to the urban area, in contrast to the remaining parts of the county where maybe a more suburban streetscape or typology really persists. And there's been a good bit of public outreach with that effort that has sort of kept people engaged with this area. I won't really get into this. This is, where we're starting to go with redeveloping a framework of just 7 policy areas and developing height and density and FAR requirements based on that. So we probably will be in our master plan update making just a few changes, not many changes to height and open space requirements. We probably revamp our floor area ratio requirements. Currently, in studying this, we noticed that the underlying zoning class actually allows for higher floor area ratios, but because of the overlay, the overlay actually reduces those overall FAR allowances, but then allows certain uses like residential and other certain uses or certain conditions to not count toward the FAR requirement. And there's a different and kind of strange way of calculating FAR. So this kind of speaks to some of that strange complexity that applies to the Parole area that I'm hoping we can simplify all of that and just make it something that's a lot easier to for the development community and for our staff to really just understand and implement going forward. We want to refine the permitted use list for this area and help ensure that we're getting redevelopment that's better tailored to a walkable and non-auto-oriented urban environment. So some of the things that we're considering are disallowing single-family detached, heavy industrial and auto dealerships in this area. That's something that will require some discussion with our decision makers because some of these uses actually exist in the area. And so we've got to kind of think through how to do that. But we definitely want to have conditional provisions that will generate a more pedestrian and less auto-oriented environment, like dealing with drive-throughs and gas stations and those kinds of things. And then our master plan update is going to incorporate a lot of the recommendations from this mobility study, like I mentioned, more urban streetscape typologies, and the bike ped network is going to be really important. Something that I think will help our development division with implementing things like the bike ped network and these roadway typologies will be they're putting together a street segment chart that lists some very specific requirements, right-of-way requirements and sidewalk widths, et cetera. That's going to help them hopefully be able to implement this plan during the development process. And so the mobility study that is going on currently for the plan is actually studying the full study area encompasses part of the city of Annapolis. And so we've had the city working very closely with our Office of Transportation. And actually they've been involved with this master plan update from the beginning very, very closely. And so they've been working with us to help pull together some of these recommendations and make sure that we're coordinated with what's going on in the city immediately across the line. And then we're also looking at changes to our incentive program for developers, and in particular that issue of mixed use being only allowed through the incentive program and not by right. That's a key issue that we want to address. There had been some discussion among our staff initially about developing this master plan as a regulatory plan and not as opposed to a master plan that is purely a plan that establishes a vision and a vision for the parole area and then leans on regulations that are in the code that will then implement that vision. One of our other town centers actually has a master plan that is itself regulatory, and all of those code provisions are pulled into that master plan, so it's all in one place. And there's been some discussion about which way do we go for the parole area. And I think we're back to having just a sort of a vision and policy master plan and letting a code update handle the regulations that will apply to the parole overlay. So that is my presentation in a nutshell, and I can stop here and take any questions. Let me see if I can stop. Am I still sharing or?
Nope, not sharing anymore. That was great, Patrick. That was really good presentation. A lot of good information.
Good.
Any questions from the group? Touched on a lot of kind of relevant topics to us.
Really good. Okay.
Yep. So, Patrick, since this master plan has been approved, were there other vision documents that were applied to it, like the complete street policies or any other thing that?
Yes, we do have a countywide complete streets policy. Getting into this, we noticed that for the county overall, some of the typologies are a little bit more suburban in nature and not as well tailored to the urban context. I mentioned that our other large town center in Odenton has a regulatory plan that already had more urban streetscape typologies that were very specific to that area. we going forward, we're well, as part of the mobility study that's going on now, they're developing some typologies that are urban and more appropriate for at least the core area of the parole town center. It may not be that those standards apply throughout, but at least for the core area to ensure that we get that dense, walkable kind of development.
Yes, Patrick, you talked about that the mixed use wasn't allowed by right, that developers had to go into that through the incentive program. Could you talk a little more about what the incentives are?
Yeah, so the incentives currently are, um, again, they were drafted, I think, in 1994 and have not really been updated. So they're a little bit vague. It's things like um, public or institutional uses like childcare, additional structured parking. Structured parking is required over a certain amount, but having additional structured parking could be a proffer that a developer would offer through the incentive program. Um, Additional public transportation, other amenities like that, additional stormwater management things. Some of these are a little bit. This needs to be updated. So this kind of proffer list is something that we're looking to update, and then, but the what you would get in exchange for those incentives in your development would be, of course, additional density.
Okay.
Or you know, FAR allowances, reduced open space requirements. That's typically, I think, how the trade-off is.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
I had a follow-up question with the complete street policy, and that is, are you looking at network connectivity for bicycle and pedestrian that are outside of your area? Because I know that you have a very popular Baltimore and trail there, Baltimore Annapolis Trail, and people have long complained about a
Yes, they have.
connection
Yeah,
that connect to Annapolis, and I don't know if your parole area is part of that oversight.
It is. Well, it is. Yeah. So, and that's a key reason why the city of Annapolis has been working with us on both the mobility study that the Office of Transportation is doing, and also this master plan update. But with the mobility study, the study area incorporated a large chunk of the city as well, and is making recommendations to help better knit together the city's bike ped network with the one that is recommended for build out in the parole area. So we are hoping, and that hopefully will then knit together with the wider countywide network, including the B&A Trail and others that are identified.
I have a quick question for you, Patrick. I know you weren't involved, back in the 90s when this was being developed, but I understand there was, a fair amount of cooperation between the city of Annapolis and the county as this plan was going through its process. And I wonder if you can speak to sort of the strategic visioning element of that relative to kind of what the city might focus on relative to what the county might focus on, if you know much about any kind of discussions that may have happened relative to that.
Yeah, it's hard for me to discern a whole lot of the detail from the 94 plan. There was a cross-jurisdictional citizen group that was involved at that time, and there had been a call at the time for a similar cross-jurisdictional coordinating group to continue to help guide development in the parole area. That group was never set well, it didn't continue. It has not been in place since I've been here. And in updating this master plan, we have been doing this without a citizen, a direct citizen committee kind of advising on that. We've been, increasing citizen input in other ways, but we have been coordinating with the city on a handful of other studies and issues that directly impact parole, but also the city's development process. They're currently updating their comprehensive plan now, so we've been coordinating very closely on our two plans. But prior to that, they had been working on. They gradually have been going through the whole city, working on sector studies, kind of smaller targeted studies throughout the city, and we've had representation on all of those committees, and one in particular is our Forest Drive, or the city's Forest Drive sector study, which leads into the parole area. Parole is really a gateway to that area, and there's a citizen task force now that's engaged with that, and it's a it's a it's a little bit of a complex subject because that roadway is one that is owned and managed by the county, and yet it runs primarily through the city, and the city therefore controls all of the development along the majority of that road. And so that's an area where we've been a little bit more coordinating with them on what that looks like, and there are still some I think there are still some issues with how we coordinate to help ensure that roadway continues to function well. And there's a lot of concern, and I think in some cases misunderstanding from some citizens about what takes place and what can be done interjurisdictionally along that road. So that is something that we're working through that does impact this master plan effort going forward. Does that kind of answer your question? I sort of got a little bit off track there, but okay.
Just jump in and say I'm shocked that there would be citizen misunderstanding. That never happens in our jurisdictions at all. What you're talking about is really poignant for me because I'm a City of Frederick elected official, and we of course are right on the edge of this area too. So the idea of the constant coordination with the city of Annapolis and your area and the city of Frederick and Frederick County in this area, I think was one that's really well taken for me. I think that's important as we go forward because I've talked to John. We kind of want development in our corporate limits, but we know that this area is already developed and ripe for redevelopment. So how do we do that in a way that does that coordinates and doesn't compete?
Yeah, and it's an issue that we're looking at. How do we coordinate on day-to-day development projects that are coming through with the city? We don't have a structure right now where county staff will go to city planning commission meetings and comment on development projects that are going on in the city, and there's not a reciprocal mechanism for the city either. And it's something that I've started bringing up, and we've established now a little bit more of an informal opportunity for reviews, more at the long range planning level between our. I'm in long range planning, so between us and the comprehensive planners at the city, trying to give them an opportunity to comment on development in the parole area, and they reciprocate with some opportunities to comment. I'm hoping that we will formalize that a little bit, strengthen that a little bit more going forward. That's to come. Are there any other questions or?
I have a few. I might jump in, but I don't want to co-opt anybody's opportunity. So if anybody else has a question, please jump in. Otherwise, I'll go ahead and ask. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is Carl Morris. Patrick, I got a couple of different questions. You started by saying that, you know, you had done a market study and you felt like the different product type was still true today. I believe that's what you said. And so I'm curious. So the first question is, now that we're hopefully get to a post-COVID situation, do you still feel that the product type that you focused on years ago is still true? So that's question number one. Question number two, full disclosure, you know, Madden Companies, the company I work for, we're developers, and Kelly knows this more than anybody. What we look for in the marketplace is just certainty. And what I've heard you state, and I know that you weren't involved in the study back in the 90s, but what things should this committee or group stay away from that makes the process flexible and or a process that does not deter development?
Yeah, so I think your second question first. First of all, I think you're probably far better able to answer what it is that the development community maybe needs in terms of certainty. And I'm really glad that I think that's great that you're on this scoping committee, because I think that perspective is really important. So in terms of the flexibility in the existing plan, as I understand it, the developers really just appreciate being able to have kind of a wider range of uses that they can implement on a particular site in parole due to those additional overlay allowances, and that there are different ways through the incentive program to get at or to really, I guess, get around certain provisions that are maybe difficult to adhere to. The incentive program at least provides a mechanism for developers to maybe proffer something else that allows that development to continue to contribute to the overall vision for the parole area. And our development division is able to kind of work with them to help identify those things and make sure that the vision is being upheld for the area. But like you said, the certainty, I think, is a key factor, and I think we all really understand that a complex and kind of difficult to administer plan is not one that serves either the development community or the planners or the ultimate vision very well if it's really tough to interpret exactly what can be done on a particular site. And developers need to be able to move very quickly and adapt to changing market forces. And if they're held up by onerous development regulations or a process that's really long and drawn out, that doesn't serve to encourage development in this area where we ultimately want development to happen in order to preserve other parts of the county and keep them more rural. So that's kind of how. Yes.
No, and I appreciate that. Are there specific items or regulations that not that we should avoid, but that we should be aware of based on your experience going through this process?
Beyond, I mean, I'm not sure I could answer that with a whole lot more detail beyond just saying the complexity. I think simplicity is really the key, and that's the direction that the update I'm hoping will take with this master plan, that we'll be able to put together a framework that's very simple, that gets at that helps development meet the requirements and bring this implement the vision for this area without being too complicated or onerous.
No, I appreciate that. It was somewhat of a loaded question, so I appreciate your honesty. Thank you.
I will say one of the things that we've had a lot of interviews with developer stakeholders in this area, and they were they weren't really went through a lot of our regulations as they stand now, and were able to point out, here's a really nice mixed use type of development that we can't build in your area because of this specifically, and this and this and this. That kind of feedback is very, very helpful, and I'm sure John has built that into this process at some point. But getting that perspective is I think going to be critical to you.
I would agree. Thank you.
I'm sure that you experienced it in your area in Frederick as well, that you have some historical sites that you have to kind of pay attention to in your development plan, or not? It's pretty.
I'm serious. The parole area, there's one old oak tree that is long gone that George Washington, I don't know, rode his horse under it or something, and there's a marker, and it's already encircled by the on-ramp to US 50. Our cultural resources don't have a whole lot to concern themselves with in this area. Again, it's built out, and any resources that were previously identified have been either protected already, or prior to protections have been obliterated. So there's really not as much as in other parts of the county.
Okay, and extending that, how are you looking at park or green spaces? How are you building that into your master plan?
Yeah, so there will be a green kind of a greenway a portion of our master plan, identifying really our riverways and our public park areas. I think more important for us is linking to, because there's really only one very small and not publicly accessible park in the actual parole growth management area. So I think more important is linkages to some of the park areas on the outskirts of the parole area, both within the city and those within the county. So really, it's looking at ways to link to those areas, and then looking at our development and redevelopment opportunities to create amenities that help create the public spaces that people can use and enjoy and appreciate while they're here, whether they live here or are visiting.
Thank you.
I guess I'll go ahead and jump in here with a question real quick. So to what extent do you think the implementation of this future plan that isn't done yet, I realize, but to what extent do you think capital investments by the county will be required to ensure its implementation? And I think about that relative to the issue of the road alignment that was identified in the master plan, and how that kind of was executed or in the form of an interparcel connection, not so much an actual road alignment. So do you think, see you, Kelly, thanks for coming. Do you think that the county anticipates backing a lot of these sort of public infrastructure investments? Do you see do you see it being implemented in the form of a development requirement, maybe even tied to adequate public facilities? What are your thoughts about that form of implementation? Because we're looking at potentially significant number of new local road connections in certain areas of this plan, and kind of understanding how that can be implemented is important.
Yeah, so it's sort of, there are some connections that are being proposed in this mobility study now. So, one in particular over US 50, but there are some others that are being recommended that will need further study and engineering study to be able to implement. But those are ones that I think will take some capital investment, as well as clearer identification of where exactly those improvements will be located in order to get the dedicated right of way and such from properties when development comes through. Yeah, we do have in this county for bike ped kind of it's not an APF. It's not called APF, but there is a fund that is required that development projects will there's a calculation and they contribute to a fund that funds bike ped amenities and connections in a defined area around the development. So that is another source of some of the funding that we'll have to implement some of these projects, particularly the bike ped. That's the one that I'm really I keep coming back to that because it was not really put together very well after the 94 plan. It has not been implemented in the 25 years hence. And we've got to do a better job going forward.
One other thing, we had talked about this a little bit offline prior to the meeting, but you mentioned that you had discussions with the mall that's located there in the Pearl district, and I wonder if you could share any of that kind of information you learned from them. I mean, I realize it's a totally different entity, totally different situation, but just be curious.
Yeah, so we of course have been coordinating with them early in the process because they're a huge landowner, and just knowing intuitively that retail was facing challenges back in 2017. We wanted to get their sense, and their sense at that time was that they were going to put together kind of a 4-phase process to start to implement about 1,000 residential units on the mall site in order to become more of a mixed use facility and not strictly retail. There had also been some discussions with the hospital, which is immediately adjacent to the mall, and so they were exploring some opportunities to perhaps do some partnerships with the hospital in terms of potentially elderly living and some lifestyle things that would be appropriate, and a good partnership between those two entities. Since then, the mall team has completely changed, and I think that they are sort of reconsidering what their future is. But I know that mixed use is going to be a part of that. The residential market in the county tends to be a lot stronger, although the parole area is where commercial and office demand exists more strongly than other parts of the county for the most part. So I think the mall will continue in some form, but it will start to incorporate residential uses as well.
That's great. I had one other question for you, and I'm trying to remember it now. Oh, yeah. So one of the things that we're kind of struggling with is balancing, or at least tapping into the ownership class of sort of residents in the area versus the tenant class. And, with the ownership class, it's kind of a little bit easier because, there's information out there to kind of access that. But the tenant class, they have less of a kind of control over the site, but they have a very much a lot of kind of stake in it. So I'm wondering if the previous parole plan kind of addressed that, or if you have any thoughts about the parole plan moving forward relative to addressing that.
I don't think the existing plan did not do a lot to differentiate between the two. And aside from, you're right, there is a lot of, I'm trying to think, in the parole area, there is a good bit of tenancy. And I think that some of those areas that tend to be more, occupied by tenants versus, and I'm speaking more in commercial and office sense. Those, I think our redevelopment opportunity areas tend to be more of the tenant spaces than some of the owner areas. And so those, in talking to, we went around and talked to a lot of those, the folks that owned those areas that we had identified as potential redevelopment areas. I don't know that the plan will get into a whole lot of detail, though, about one versus the other, as opposed to kind of the overall vision for the area and for the,
I guess
different
maybe
sites.
I mean more in terms of outreach, less in terms of like plan proposals. Have you considered how you might tap into the tenant population relative to the ownership population?
To be honest, we have not done a whole lot of that, and it is something that we, now that we're picking up this master plan effort again, we can sort of redouble those efforts going forward.
Hey, Patrick,
That's
this
great.
is Carl again. Just as a kind of a follow-up question to that is, when you guys look at this master plan, one of the biggest concerns for me is just that we have a plan that is balanced between, employment, commercial, and residential. Did you guys look at that? Did you have a certain percentage that you had as a goal?
We didn't identify a specific percentage, but we did look at the overall balance, and we are still heavily weighted toward, the commercial and office uses in the area. And so there is still, as identified in 94, there is still a need for additional residential to help balance that out in this area. I think the market is a little bit different than perhaps it was in 94, and I think the residential uses are a little more, there's more demand, I think, just organically for the residential than maybe there had been previously. But we did not identify a specific target percentage for each of those uses for this area.
And then another follow-up question. Are you aware, and I've tried to look for this, I've seen it before, but just can't put my hands on it. Is there a ratio that should be used for a healthy community, meaning between the employment, commercial, residential? Is that a 30-30, 33-33 split, or is it weighed one way or the other?
I don't know what that specific ratio would look like, but at this point we're really working to pull together all of the right elements to make this. One of the challenges that we have in parole is that our residential units tend to be high end, and that's so I think affordability and thinking about equity going forward has been a little bit more of a concern for us, because this is the area where we want to have our our transit hubs and our links to the commuter lines that go out to Baltimore and to DC, and then into the city of Annapolis. And if the housing that we're getting here is more geared toward specifically the higher end, and not so family oriented. I mentioned that the household size is much lower here than in the city and in the rest of the county. Um, that's something that I think we are going to need to think about going forward. And in the earlier draft, there had been some provisions related to affordable housing that I've got to look at again, because there have already been some code changes countywide related to workforce housing and affordable housing, and so we'll need to reconsider those and how to apply those specifically in parole and what more to do. But that's been an area that we've been focusing on.
Yeah. So how do you see putting together a incentive program, or where you see the county need to make some commitment to help this along, or some program to attract developers in the area to build the affordable housing?
The draft that I had put together previously included some in the draft bonus program. It included references to a percentage, and I cannot remember off the top of my head what that percentage was, but providing a percentage of affordable or workforce housing units within an overall development. But like I said, going forward, the county has adopted some new countywide provisions in this area that we're going to have to look at a little bit more closely to see what more needs to be done to help bring this about in the parole area.
That's great. Great questions. Any other questions, guys? All right. Patrick, thank you very much. This was incredibly interesting, incredibly useful presentation. We very much appreciate you taking the time to share with us. We'll keep track of how the parole plan moves forward in the future, and keep you kind of in the loop with what we're doing. And once again, thank you very much for helping us out.
Thanks a lot. Y'all take care.
Me too.
Yep, thank you, Patrick.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Mhm.
Bye-bye.
Well, that's really all we have on the agenda today. Unless anybody has any items they want to discuss at this point, I might turn it over to see if we have anybody on the public input line for comment. Which we do not. I thought this was a good discussion, good presentation today. Felt like I learned a lot. I thought you guys asked some really good questions. Carl, that was a really good one about the mix. I know you've brought that up a number of times, and it's really something to look into in more detail. And so, I mean, I feel like we're learning more and making progress towards, coming up with a good plan here. So I appreciate your time. The next meeting on November 30th, right after Thanksgiving. I think we're going to try to keep it somewhat lighter. It's just going to be Frederick County planning staff presenting 3 other case studies to look into. We very likely won't be able to go as in depth as Patrick has, but just things to consider. And then the following meeting in 4 weeks, we're going to look at a draft framework for the vision and for goals for the South Frederick plan. So I appreciate your time, and unless anybody has anything else, I'll bid you adieu.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye, guys.
Yeah, thanks,
Thank you
John.
very much.
See
Thank you
all.
again.
Hey, how are you?
Hey, good. How you doing?